Welcome back to the Raza podcast, Portrait of a Community. Bienvenidos. If it's your first time here, we have the OG Chicana here today, Rebecca Garavito Adame. She's going to tell us what Riverside was really about back in the days.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We are very excited to hear about what Riverside was like when you were growing up. So why don't you start off by telling us how long you've been in Riverside and your family?
See, I've been in Riverside my entire life, 68 years. I was born and raised in Casablanca. I moved out of the community when I was about 17, but then I moved back in when I was 18, and I lived there for a few years, and then started a family, and we moved out for different reasons. Not good reasons, but we had to move out. And we went back again. And so we finally moved out for good when we purchased our first home. And it's not been far from the community. My heart has always been there.
So you lived in Casablanca when you were a kid, moved out, and moved back in? Did I hear that correctly?
I lived in Casablanca until I was 17.
Okay.
And then we moved out, not far. We just moved in the outskirts of the community. I moved back into the community in my mom's old house, as a matter of fact, when I got married. And we lived there for a few years, and then we moved out, had to move out for the safety of my children. We moved out, and then a few years later, we moved back, and we stayed there until we purchased our new home, or our first home.
You know, something I've always been curious about, well, I just recently moved to Riverside, and I always hear this, is that back in the day, it was a lot safer in the sense where everyone kind of even left their doors unlocked. Yes. Is that true?
That's true, very true. We left our windows open and our doors unlocked. I've had times where a few of the neighbor kids would just walk in. I remember one young man, his name was, we used to call him, well, his nickname was Popo. I don't even know to this day what his real name was, but he walked into the house and went into the kitchen, and we weren't even aware that he was in the house. And then we redirected him to where he needed to be. But it was nothing unusual. It was just, the doors were open, and he didn't come in to harm anybody. He just got a little lost. And then another occasion, the neighbor kid from across from Evans Street came, and one of the young boys came over and opened the door, came and sat down and ate. We had a pan dulce, or pan mexicano is what we called it, on the table, sat down and started eating. And once he was done, he left. It was no big deal. So I just said, hey, who let you in? And he just kept on doing his business, and then he left.
And this was back in the 60s, 70s? Which decade are we talking about here?
I think it was the 70s, early 70s.
Is that when you started school in CB?
I went to school from kindergarten to 5th grade. When we were integrated into community schools.
What do you mean by integrated?
We were segregated from the community schools. Our school, Casablanca Elementary School, was predominantly Mexican kids and a few black kids, and they spoke Spanish. We were all just.
Everybody in the school spoke Spanish. Black community, Hispanic community, everyone was speaking Spanish in school.
Everybody spoke Spanish. Even the black families that lived in the neighborhood, the Ruffs, the McCulloughs, the Stewarts, we were all just a big family.
Was that because they were teaching Spanish in school, or the community, or a combination of both?
No, it was. We weren't allowed to speak Spanish in school. We weren't allowed to use our Spanish language. So that's why most of us, or many of us, lost the Spanish language. Spanish was my first language, and then when I started going to school, we weren't allowed to use Spanish. So many of us have lost the Spanish language.
What happened if you spoke Spanish in school?
We would get scolded. In my mother's generation, they would get hit for speaking Spanish. But in my generation, I think my generation was the last Chicano generation that used a lot of the Spanish still. There was Spanglish is what we would use. We would use Spanish words and English words in combination.
How old were you when you guys started getting integrated then?
I was in 5th grade. I went to Casablanca Elementary School from kindergarten to 5th grade. My 6th grade year, they bused us to different schools. They divided us, they divided us by streets. And so we didn't all go together to one school. Some were sent to Magnolia, others were sent to Jefferson, others were sent to Madison, just different schools. For me, it was a very, very trying experience, and I had difficulty with that, even growing up, difficulty adjusting. It was a big adjustment for me personally.
What do you think the percentage was once you were integrated? Because it was the Hispanic community, the Black community, and then there was the white community. So what was like kind of like the breakdown once you started getting integrated in school?
We were the minority. We were very much the minority in the school. It wasn't not even, I can't even say it was 30%. We were very much a minority in the schools that we were integrated to.
How would the teachers and the kids treat you once you guys got integrated into their schools? Because you guys went into their schools, right?
Yes, we went into their schools. It was uncomfortable. Some of us adjusted and others, well, I could say others adjusted. Some of us didn't. It was difficult. It was a difficult move. It was difficult going into middle school and high school. It was a little easier because in the high school and the middle school, there were more Hispanic kids that were together. But in our elementary school, that was a very, very traumatic experience because, as I said, we weren't even 30% Hispanic. We were very much, again, the minority. I didn't have any friends, very few friends. I think I can remember one friend that I made. I remember her name. Her name was Judy. And I remember her inviting me to her house. She lived down the street. And I thought, oh, my gosh, she's rich, because we weren't used to the community. Casablanca community was a humble community. I'm not saying that they were drastically poor. It was just a humble place. It was a good place to live in. Everybody belonged. Everybody was family. I call it home still. It's still my home.
Was there like a little bit of like tribalness in school where everyone just stuck to themselves?
Pretty much. I think pretty much of the Hispanics. There were a few kids from the east side that I met in elementary school, and we kind of all just stuck together. I don't think too many of us gravitated to any of the Anglo kids because it was difficult. It was difficult finding our place.
Were they
I
mean,
think it was.
Or were they just uncomfortable? Like you said that you were uncomfortable. Were they just uncomfortable or unfamiliar with you guys, or was it just mean, like mean kids? They weren't
mean. They were just. It was different for them too. I think it was a change for them to see a lot of brown kids in the school. They weren't as comfortable with us either. But they were not mean. Some, of course, you always have some that will be, sarcastic and make you feel unwelcome. But for the majority, I think they tried. I think the teachers talked to them about befriending the Hispanic kids that were going to be coming into the school.
What about the parents?
I don't think we had a lot of participating parents in the school. It was unusual. We did have. I remember when I went to Casablanca Elementary School and they had meetings and they had assemblies. We had always had a big group of Hispanic parents that attended, but I don't remember that being so the year that I attended elementary school. I don't remember ever attending any meetings or back to school nights or any of that type of thing.
Did the education change at all? Was it just the same system, or did you feel like there was a difference when you changed schools?
I think there was a difference. Our school supplies, our books weren't top quality in Casablanca Elementary School, but of course we didn't know that. We started to see that, well, we don't have this and we didn't have that. And again, I'm speaking out of my experience. This is my story. I don't know. Each of us have a different way of seeing their experience being segregated, being bussed out of the community. We went to a school where all of us lived just in the neighborhood down the street. I lived across the street from the school. It was not only the difference in attending another school, the difference in the community of the school itself, not having so many Hispanic kids there, supplies, the teachers, the busing. We had to be bused away from our community to a new area that we were not familiar with. So it was a lot of change. The transition was a difficult transition to the point where I've never, up to this day, I still struggle with feeling comfortable around Anglo people. And so I really admire my children because they've been able to overcome that, or they've been able to get past that. I thank the Lord that what I felt didn't in any way affect them, and they went on to school and they don't feel that way. But I'll tell you what, at one time, years later, when I was already married and had children, and we were at this point living in Casablanca, I received a survey in the mail. It was a long survey, 10-page survey, asking me what my experience was in being integrated to an elementary school after having attended Casablanca Elementary School from kindergarten to 5th grade. And it made me so angry. I was so angry that they had the audacity to ask me 15 years later what my opinion was and how I felt and how it affected me, when I think that they should have done that at some point, had counseling. Somebody talk to us and make us understand, or help us to understand the changes and what was going on, and that it wasn't that we were different. It was just that the situation was different.
Was there anything else outside of being segregated and then integrated that made you feel discriminated and made you feel less than as you were growing up, or even in your adulthood? I've
always been uncomfortable with my expression, how my use of vocabulary, and I had a difficult time with that, and I've struggled with that all my life. So I think because of my experience there, I tried extra hard to do well in school, to prove that I was just as good as anybody else.
I mean, I'm sure you're not the only one that felt like that growing up. So how did the community kind of join together to kind of fight against that, or stay close together to unite?
Well, I think what happened was I think most of us couldn't share these with our parents. Our parents were just hardworking. They didn't focus on, that was just something that you didn't talk about. You didn't share with your parents. So I think what happened as young people, we started to join groups, and there was a group called the Brown Berets, and that's how I think we expressed the frustration. We were just as equal to anyone else, and that we had to fight for our rights just like anybody else had the right to be.
What was that? What was the Brown Berets? What would you guys do? Like, what was the purpose?
It was kind of it wasn't a violent gathering. They would gather and they would march and they would express the need to be equal, express the need to feel noticed, express the need to feel they belonged. Again, and I say this because when we were in the community, we belonged. We all had the same thing in common. We were all together. It was a family. It didn't matter the troubles that everybody had. We stuck together. And yes, we had issues. There were families that were, that had issues with other families. But for the most part, we all stuck together. We knew each other. We knew that we could count on that being our home, count on each other in some form or another. But we had all the same thing in common, that we belonged to that community. So when we were segregated, we began to feel, I think many of us began to feel the need to belong to something. And I think that's where that started, the Brown Berets.
And that was like activism, protests, or marches down Riverside?
Yes, Riverside, different parts of the county of Riverside. I have a friend that is still very much involved in it, and
so it still exists today.
It still exists today. It was very strong in the 70s, where they'd have marches, they'd have rallies, they wore a uniform, they had a brown beret that stood for Chicanos. In that time period, we were called Chicanos. And that's another thing. They never knew what to call us, Mexican Americans, Mexicans, because we were born and raised in America, but were of Hispanic descent. They decided we're Chicanos. And whenever we'd fill out applications, there was even a place where they marked Chicano. Now they don't even have that anymore, but that's how they labeled us, Chicanos. We were American, born and raised in America, but Hispanic heritage or descent. So we were called Chicanos, and we were proud of it.
Is there anything in particular that ever happened to you that inspired you to join the Brown Berets, or was it just everyone around you was advocating for the same thing because everyone had similar experiences? Or what can you tell us about your personal life and your personal experience?
I wrote a poem. I wish I would have remembered to bring it, and I think it thoroughly expresses how I felt. I felt part of me, I belonged. I felt that I didn't have to fight for being anybody but myself. And that's what the community, the Brown Berets, the Chicanos, that's how we were all just part of each other. I wish now that I had brought the poem with me. I wrote it when I was in high school, and it very much expresses what I felt during that time period. There's a lot of things, but I can't think of one particular thing. I think the greatest thing was that we didn't feel that we belonged. We didn't belong
neither here nor
there. We weren't accepted as equal to the Anglos and the district and the police, and everyone didn't want us to be part of the community because they felt it was just trouble. All we did was start trouble and make trouble, which that's not true. There are many people that have come out of the community, that there's doctors and lawyers and teachers and filmmakers and many people that have been successful and have come out of the community and have stood up and gone far above what they could ever imagine they would have.
How old were you around the time where you were the most active with the Brown Berets?
The early 70s, 60s and 70s. I was probably, I would say maybe the 69 through 71, 72.
Was it getting better, the atmosphere in Riverside, as you were getting older?
I think it started to get better. Not right away. Not until the late 70s did it get better, I believe. They were still pretty strong late 70s.
You said something interesting right now. You said that everyone always thought that the community was up to no good. So what was the relationship between the community and the law enforcement at that time?
I want to add this before I answer your question. I remember growing up when people would ask you, where do you live? Or where? And I'd say, I live in Casablanca, or I live across the other side of the tracks. They would just say, ooh, it was a bad community and it was bad people. And it made me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel proud of where I live, but uncomfortable that it's not all bad. People weren't bad. The relationship between the police and the community was not good during that time. We had a lot going on. But the police, I think that at some point they wanted us just to kill each other off. There was so much going on.
Why do you say that?
The police were not very supportive of the community. I felt like they wanted to, or their hopes were that we killed each other off at some point. There was a time, a personal experience of, I have a cousin that is doing life in prison for something that he did not do. There was a lot of proof and incidents that were given to prove that he was not guilty. As a matter of fact, they said that he did this crime and then he ran away from the crime, which was not even true because he had his leg had been injured and he couldn't even run, much less run so fast that he could have made it from the scene of a crime. And he was not even there. He had been there earlier in the day, but he was in another city at the time. He was not even in the neighborhood. They convicted him for what they call alibis and witnesses, which were untrue. To this day, he's fighting it. The person that committed the crime confessed to it, but they've just ignored it. So he's been fighting it and fighting it. There's instances where I had my house shot at from people that weren't from the area. I called the police. I had 2 children, 2 little girls, and I was by myself in the home, and I called the police, and they never came until it turned daybreak. That happened 2 or 3 times, and it's just they didn't support the community the way they portrayed to support the community.
How would they even justify that? Till daybreak? So would they just show up hours and hours after an incident hoping that it would just clear itself out? Or
well, of course, their story is that so much was going on in the community, and the community was a bad community, so they were afraid to come in, and they were afraid for their own safeties. But what about they were supposed to be fighting for the people, and they were supposed to be protecting the people, but yet they didn't even respond to the call. And I told them, I'm here by myself. I have 2 little girls. I'm afraid. My kids are afraid, and they never showed. There was a time that police wouldn't even come into Casablanca because they would say that it was so bad. They were afraid for their safety. They wouldn't come in to protect or to support.
So no matter what, not even if a citizen called in, not even if something was going down, or any crime being committed, there was no police in CB at that time to protect the community?
No, there was no police. I don't remember them coming in, and I know incidents that I called the police a few times because of something that had happened in my own home and even around my home, and they didn't respond. Had we been in a white neighborhood, I think they would have responded quickly. But because we were in Casablanca, the community that they so-called was bad, they didn't respond in a timely manner.
How does that affect your personal relationship with the police?
I've always, there's nothing that I can do. The police is its own force. There's nothing I can do. So what I've tried to do is teach my children and my grandchildren that the best way to keep from them harming you or having to deal with the police anyway is to stay out of trouble. In all, what I have to say is about my community, that it's the best time of my life growing up in a community. They're going to school there, knowing the families there. I grew up in a time where we had cruising and dances in the streets and neighborhood parties. And it was a time that we were able to enjoy each other's company, that we were able to grow up. I think we grew up healthy because we were able to have friends. And I have long life friends that I grew up with in that community that I still to this day call my friends. So it's unfortunate that Casablanca has been labeled the way it has, but and it's gotten better. But at the time I was growing up, it was a difficult time for teenagers to grow up. But it was a happy time.
That stigma that CB had is starting to get a little bit better, especially with projects such as a new elementary school being built, the home, and obviously films that are trying to portray the Chicano community in a different way. How do you think the Raza film is going to help that out?
I think it'll help people understand what the Mexican population has gone through there, or the community. I think most importantly that it portrays the life of the community and the struggles that the community has, and that it wasn't a bad community and it wasn't bad people. It was just people that were misunderstood, that were mistreated for reasons that they shouldn't have been. Some maybe were just, but most of them, they were harassed. There was a lot of harassing and brutality by the police at that time. So kids weren't able to just grow up and be themselves because of the way they dressed, because of the way they looked, because they hung out all together in groups. You know, it wasn't, it was frowned upon. And so now I think that this film is it would be a great film for people to watch and understand the community and understand the feelings and the emotions and the struggles that people went through.
You feel misunderstood by people outside of the community? Is that something you think you carry?
I think I did as a young, for a long time. I think now that I'm older, I don't think about it as much as I did. But when I was young and raising my kids, I struggle with it. And my kids will tell you, I would always tell them it's because we're Mexican. But that's the way I felt. You know, they treated us that way because we were Mexicans. And so I think I kind of gave instilled that in my children, that it's because we're Mexican. And that was my answer for everything, because that's the way I felt. It's because we're Mexican that they treat us the way they treat us, that they look at us the way they look at us, and the way they don't give us equal rights because we're Mexicans. And I truly felt that. I don't feel it as much anymore now that I'm older, because I think, you know, it's changed. Things have changed in a lot of ways. I've grown to understand that I'm a person just like anybody else. And I have the ability, the capability, and the skills that anyone else has. And I think that's what has helped me with the struggle to get to where I am. And God, of course, first.
For the audience, the audience might not know this, but this is actually the screenwriter and actress Breanna, Victor Adame's grandmother. How do you feel about your grandson writing this story and bringing it to life and seeing yourself on film, on the screen, and just seeing all that in front of you?
I'm very proud of him. I'm proud of his abilities and the skills that God has given him. I'm proud of him that he has enough passion to be able to feel this and feel the stories that have been told to him. There's a lot of things, a lot of stories that I don't feel free to share that we've shared with him, and a lot of how we were treated and a lot of experiences that we've had. And I'm thankful that he has had the passion to write down and put it in writing what his grandparents and his family had to endure during that time. And again, I say that not everyone felt as strongly as I feel maybe. I don't know, some of us. But I'm proud to say that he's come a long way. My children have come a long way. My mother, who grew up in the neighborhood, was determined enough to prove that she was equal and even better. She went on to school. She didn't even finish the 9th grade. Got married at 15. She went on to school and she became an administrator later in life and was able to work for the district of Riverside. I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that they proved that just because we're Mexicans doesn't mean that we can't get ahead.
You know what they say, it's Mexican, not Mexican. Okay, Becky, you've been here 68 years, here, born and raised in Riverside. I don't think there's anybody else's advice or opinion I'm going to take on this. What's the number one place to go eat in Riverside?
Well, it used to be Amada's Market. We used to go to Amada's store. They had a restaurant in the store, and we'd always go there to buy food. It was always good food. I grew up at a time, and I want to share, too, that we had a store. We had a little store that the kids would hang out to. It was called Mama's Store. And they were Japanese people that owned the store. Way back when we were young, they were sent to a communist camp. And the neighbors, who were Hispanic neighbors across the street, took care of their store until they came back and they were able to run their store again. But we had Mama and Papa, and they owned the store. We had the Tanaguchis, and it was a community that everyone took pride in. And that's what, more than anything, I want people to understand, that the community took pride in their homes, took pride in the raising of their children, took pride in who they were and what they stood for.
You know, a little birdie told me that your first date was actually at a really hot spot here in Riverside. You want to tell us about that one?
Yeah, it was Delia's Grinders. At that time, it was here on Magnolia Street. And my first date, I remember my husband and I went to eat there. And the grinders and the breads were so big. And I remember that he bought me a grinder. And I was so embarrassed. I didn't want to open my mouth wide enough to bite it. So he ended up eating it. He ate the burger and his hamburger. I mean, the grinder and his hamburger. But Delia's Grinders has always been one of my favorites, even now.
Love
if the kids ask me, if the kids ask me, where do I want to have my birthday lunch at, is at Delia's Grinders. I don't want to end without giving God the glory for where we are today. He's taken us from a place of struggle and suffering to a better place. We had a hard life growing up, but a lot of fun. Fiestas, jamaicas, we called them jamaicas then, street dances, cruising. But God has always been in the midst and has always protected us. He's protected me from my house being shot at. He's protected my children. There was times we had to sleep in the back room because, of the fear of being shot at and my windows being broken. But God was always there in the midst, and I thank the Lord for that. I thank the Lord for the courage that he gave us to stand firm and believe in our community. I've never stopped believing in the community. The community has changed quite a bit. There's a few families there that are old families. But if I was able to, I'd retire in Casablanca and I'd build me a little house there and live there until I die.
Thank you so much, Becky, for being here. I learned a lot about Riverside just listening about your stories, so I'm excited for everyone to tune into this one. So thank you for your time and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Viva la raza.
Viva la raza.